So Dimitri Soudas is with us today, and Dimitri, of course, is a household name in Canada, particularly if you live in a household of political junkies and serial bloggers. So until he recently retired from politics, Dimitri was a fixture on Parliament Hill, having served 5 years in progressively senior positions in the Harper government's office, in the Prime Minister's office, which is truly a record in longevity. I think he famously said upon retiring as Director of Communications just a few short months ago that there is no job in Canada that will burn you out more quickly, and I think we can all agree to that. So as I was telling Dimitri just a few seconds ago, he looks so much younger, and he has confirmed that his hair is in fact growing back. So, so I knew Dimitri back when I was a reporter on Parliament Hill, and me being a member of the press gallery and he being a member of the Prime Minister's communications office, he didn't return my calls all that frequently, but no, that's a joke. But all that aside, but despite relationships between, the media and the Prime Minister's office that, are never exactly warm and fuzzy, no matter who's in charge, we can say that, Team Harper it certainly didn't stop the government from really controlling the political narrative and really building on two successive minority governments for its breakthrough majority government win in the last May election. So as Director of Communications for Stephen Harper during that breakthrough election, Dimitri was responsible for advertising, marketing, media relations, and crisis management across the Government of Canada. Since then, he's taken a job in the far less political world of Olympic sports. That's a joke. As the Canadian Olympic Committee's lead communications person, he's responsible for managing its brand message and plays a key role in driving the communication strategies with its stakeholder and partner groups, such as Olympic athletes, national sports federations, organizing committees, Sports Canada, broadcast partners, and business partners. It's safe to say that Dimitri really thrives in fast-paced environments, and today he's sharing with us his experience with marketing brand in politics as well as outside of politics. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us today, Dimitri.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina. I left my BlackBerry there just to make sure that I focus on my presentation. I also note that Christina initially started off by branding the government as the Harper government, so that is the right branding. But first and foremost, I want to say good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for inviting me to speak today at the 2011 Canadian Public Relations Society Conference. I also want to give a special thanks to William Johnson, who reached out to me a few months ago. He's right over there in the back, and I know you've done tremendous work along with the rest of the team. So thank you very much. Now, today's a special day. It's February 29th. It's a date that only occurs every 4 years, and some key things have happened on a date that only occurs every 4 years. On February 29th, Prime Minister Trudeau announced his retirement from politics. American President Dwight D. Eisenhower announced that he was running for a second term. Sven Robinson became the first member of Parliament to come out as gay, and Gordie Howe scored his 800th goal. He scored one more after that before retiring. Now, what do these four unique events have in common? They're great moments. The decision to seek re-election and win re-election of an American president and a World War II hero who crusaded against communism and corruption gave courage to so many people. An MP who led the way for many others to speak up on their sexual orientation is a great moment in history. A hockey legend who inspired millions through his scoring prowess, physical strength, and career longevity. And finally, a Liberal PM's decision to retire from politics is always good news. Now, whether you work in government, in politics, the non-for-profit sector, or private industry, effective communications and branding are pivotal to an organization's success. In politics versus the private sector, building and sustaining brand loyalty has some similarities and some differences. The strategies may be different, but the tactics are very, very similar, because at the end of the day, a brand is a brand. Hence, tactical planning and marketing play a key role in determining whether or not your brand succeeds or fails in achieving strategic objectives and sustaining brand loyalty. You know, as if the world of marketing and PR was not complex enough, the last 8 years have actually seen an unprecedented and explosive increase on the impact that social and digital media have had on brand positioning and communication. They have revolutionized the way that we do business forever. And as Susan, who's here today, Susan Delacourt from The Star, who wrote to me in an email a few weeks ago, mass marketing is out and segmented marketing is in. But let's pause for a second and answer the following question. What is a brand? Before answering that very simple question, what needs to be clear in any organization is what a brand is not. A brand is not just the logo. It's not just the marketing or the advertising. It's not just for consumers, customers, clients, voters. It's not just for consumer-driven brands or organizations. And it's not just companies or organizations. What a brand is, it's what people think of you. Your brand is the sum total of every positive, negative, or mediocre experience that anyone has with your organization at any touch point. And that is exactly why you don't own your brand. Your stakeholders do. And it is exactly why every experience that anyone has with your organization either builds or erodes brand equity. Now, your brand is the organizing principle that drives every single goal, informs every decision, and shapes every single message. Now, great brands have deep personal connections with consumers, and they're at the center of everything we do. Great brands become a necessity in our lives. The days of vanilla, one-size-fits-all are long over for brands and products. Consumers totally demand authentic brands that interact with them on a personal level. And the conversation cannot be one way with consumers. They want to be surprised and excited by their favorite brands, but they want to shape them as well. Now, in order to connect with consumers, companies must completely focus on their target consumer, speaking their language, seeing the world through their eyes, and comfortable on their turf, street, waves, dirt, or snow. Now, being inside the world of our consumers gives us the insight to create compelling product and tell their stories. Tell their stories in exciting ways and build communities and experiences on a global scale, like Nike, for example, in the human race. Now, strong brands are more critical today than ever before because of global markets, hyper-choice, hyper-messaging, and massive hidden talent storage. Now, global markets have created hyper-choice, and with hyper-choice comes hyper-messaging. And the big problem that we're having is that we are on a massive shortage of talent. Almost 80 million baby boomers are set to retire in the next decade, and less than 40 million workers will be available to replace them. Now, brand building requires discipline. It is never a matter of personal preferences. People often ask me, how do we build a strong brand? It is simple, actually. In order to build a strong brand, we must create great experiences by ensuring that product is high quality on performance. It must be remarkable through the product, the service, the process, and purpose. And above all, it must be different. It must be unique. Now, the three tools of creating great experiences, being remarkable and owning the difference, complement each other because a great product or service is not enough. You must be a brand so great, it's worth telling others about it. And don't just differentiate. You need to own the real difference. Now, strong brands are built through consistency, time, and management. And these are the rules, and they cannot be bent, altered, or ignored. Any of them. Be consistent, but different. Brand building is a process which occurs over time. It's not an event. And ultimately, the chief executive officer must also be the chief brand officer, the chief communications officer, the chief marketing officer. And I'll get to this last point in a second. But think of Volvo for just 1 second. When you think of this brand, what word comes to mind? Safety. It is their brand position, the point of difference in the marketplace. If someone is looking for a safe car, the first brand that pops into their head is Volvo, period. Now, since Volvo was launched 80 years ago, they've had a single unrelenting focus: safety. They are responsible for almost every significant safety feature on the automobile today. They say that in Sweden, when there's a car accident, there are 3 vehicles that always arrive first on the scene: the ambulance, the police, and Volvo engineers. Now, they study the crashes in order to improve safety features. On their website, there's actually a section called Volvo Saved My Life, in which car accident victims relate how their Volvo did just that. They absolutely own safety in consumers' minds. Or think of Steve Jobs. Because your brand is everything, every point of contact, and every experience that your company has with its stakeholders, the CEO must be the CBO. The CEO is the only person in an organization with the authority to ensure that everyone is living the brand, to ensure that marketing is aligned with the rest of the company and not operating in a silo. Brands are built from the inside out, so you need to say what you do and do what you say. In other words, the brand is not the sole responsibility of the marketing or the communications department, but even the chief branding officer and the chief marketing officer, the marketing department, cannot do it by themselves. They need everyone, absolutely everyone in the company to champion the brand. Because at the end of the day, every single person in an organization is the ambassador of the brand. Now, Steve Jobs was an amazing chief branding officer. His vision has always been to create perfect machines, and to do this by maintaining control and consistency of the Apple brand. The Mac, the iPad, the iPhone, being just a few of his many achievements. I don't know if a lot of you know, but Steve Jobs was actually fired in 1985, and he was replaced by a Wall Street whiz, a non-CBO, who took the company off-brand and drove it to near bankruptcy. Now, Steve Jobs was hired again in 1997 and became the heart, soul, driving force, and chief branding officer again. He was named CEO of the decade, grew the company from $5 to $308 billion in 10 years. Shares went from $26 to $367. In May 2010, Apple passed Microsoft as the world's largest technology company. In May 2011, passed Google as the world's most valuable brand. Now, the foundation of building a brand must start with a simple question in order to ensure that everyone is living the brand. What do people think of you? A brand foundation includes the following elements: core purpose, which is why do you exist? Vision, where are you going and how will you get there? Values, what you believe in, what are your principles? Your mission, what you do every single day to get there. Your character, which is your voice and how you act. Your position, which is how you make a difference. And your positioning statement, which is how you communicate your difference. Now, the core purpose, why you exist. Every successful organization was started to address a need that the founding entrepreneur had identified in the market and was passionate to correct. The core purpose is intended to communicate the organization's purpose so that those who identify with it can find greater meaning in their lives. Unlike goals or strategies, the core purpose endures over time as a source of guidance. Vision, where are you going and how will you get there? That, in a nutshell, is your flag on that distant hill, a clear and encouraging direction to look towards for. It must be measurable, and you must know how you will get there. Your mission, which is what you do every single day to get there. Every person, every role, every interaction encompasses the key components of your continuous day-to-day activities that will drive you towards achieving your vision. Values, which is what you believe in and your guiding principles. These are non-negotiable. These are fundamental beliefs you share, and it guides ultimately how you conduct yourselves with all people. Character, which is how you act, and your voice. And it is extremely important to operate with consistency. Internal guide of how you want to be perceived, so that absolutely everything you say and do is carried out consistently by those who represent and are presenting your organization. Position and how you make a difference. Now that is the uniqueness. That is the difference that you authentically own. Don't just differentiate. Create a meaningful difference. Volvo's position, for example, safety. Now your positioning statement. This is a creative and more emotional way to communicate the position to stakeholders and is used next to and in support of your name. A positioning statement is not a tagline, it's not a slogan, which by comparison are usually initiative related, short term, and don't embrace the power of the position. Volvo's positioning statement, for life. Now, effective brands and effective organizations focus on 4 key components: strategic planning, crisis management, media and public relations, and advertising. Now, in order for advertising and media relations to be effective, media relations and PR being your earned media and advertising being your paid media, in order for those 2 categories to be effective, you must, as an organization, plan effectively. You must be ready for the moment you pull the trigger on your announcement, on your event, that everything has been planned out accurately. And the best way to do that is to actually write things down. And crisis management. As I said earlier, crisis management, if not handled properly, can erode a brand's equity. So in order for your advertising and your media relations strategies to be meaningful and to have an impact, you must ensure that you are planning well and that you are managing any crises that are going through your organization at any given time. Now, digital media and its endless possibilities. With digital and social media, organizations can strengthen their brand, reach a wider audience, but it's important to have some core principles, which is to interact, to engage, to respond, to personalize, and finally to target. You know, getting used to leading the way and being ahead of the curve is essential on that front. Always think 3 steps ahead. And you know, in some organizations there is competition. So if you're 3 steps ahead of your competitor, he or she will be playing catch up instead of building. Now, I do want to cross over briefly over to politics, where branding is very similar in its core principles, but very different sometimes in its execution. Now, since the formation of a new party in late 2003, Prime Minister Harper has built a conservative brand slowly, methodically, and 1 step at a time. Slowly but surely, in winning 3 elections in a row, the Harper Conservatives have increased their seat count and their share of the popular vote in 3 consecutive elections, i.e. the Conservative brand has had a net positive impact on the consumer, or as he or she is called in this domain, the voter. Now, the Liberal Party, on the other hand, has been reduced to its lower share of the popular vote and its lowest seat count in both absolute and relative terms since Confederation. Now, 18.9% of the popular vote and 11% of the seats. That is also historic. And it happened on May 2nd, 2011. Now, that is because their core purpose, vision, mission, values, character, position, and positioning statement became too confusing, unclear, and undisciplined. The Liberal brand's sum total is clearly in the negatives in terms of the experiences the voters had with their organization. Now, the emergence of the New Democrats as the official opposition. Not only did they win 103 seats, they also broke the 30% hold in popular vote, when previously their best showing had been to squeak past 20%. The NDP, but especially their leader, the late Jack Layton, during the last campaign were being remarkable and owning the difference, where in Quebec, their leader was a good chief brand officer. And the Bloc Québécois, with fewer seats than a Volkswagen Golf, disappeared as a recognized party. And on a personal note, I say it couldn't have happened to a better guy. Now, Mr. Ignatieff had ample opportunities to brand and define himself as he was leader of the opposition for more than 2 years. He chose to trigger an election. In his exit interview with the national newspaper, he said that false advertising, and he used the word lies, and I quote, prevented him from controlling the narrative of his life. Now, Mr. Ignatieff ran a great campaign, according to Liberals. It was not his fault in the wake that the advertising, he made no headway. Now, the argument that the Liberals ran a strong campaign, except for the failure to persuade voters, brings to mind the claim by former Washington Mayor Marion Barry that said basically Washington has one of the lowest crime rates in the country outside of the killings. So the Liberals, who now say obviously their leader didn't have a chance, used to gloat that the advertising, the Conservative advertising, was backfiring and actually working to the Liberals' advantage. A senior Liberal strategist was actually crowing at our ads, had gone too far, and was talking about, your attack must always have been an unvarnished truth at the center of it, he wrote, and talked about the televised assault on Iggy, which was built on too many exaggerations, too many out-of-context quotes, too many falsehoods, and those ads have now been contradicted by the reality of the man, end of quote. And some media, too, after the May 2 election, there was a columnist who wrote, by the time the campaign began, the Harper team had Ignatieff shot full of holes he couldn't recover. But just months earlier, that same person had said that the ads were junk and likely to backfire, and named at how, the gullible, hardly something political experts would have recommended as risky. Now, I agree with that columnist and the Liberal strategist that voters do deserve full credit. They're sharp and insightful. And the voters are never fooled by falsehood, and they vote for the brand that best represents their interest. Now, the Conservative advertising campaign relied heavily on provable, verifiable facts, particularly things that Mr. Ignatieff himself had said. And the Conservative campaign represented those things in his own words and then let the voters draw those conclusions. Now, again, to point to the reality, Mr. Ignatieff had nearly 6 years, more than 2 of them as leader of the official opposition, to explain to ordinary Canadians what motivated his return to Canada and how he wanted to brand himself. His failure to define himself was his choice. He ultimately branded himself, nobody else. Now, there's also sometimes a badly flawed misperception in politics that especially about communications, which is what I used to do, that everything is about spin. Everything is spin, 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 spin. The truth is, though, that witty wordsmithing and purple prose won't help a politician whose position is weak on substance. Voters just weren't buying the argument that a democratically elected minority government, one that needed the votes of other parties to pass legislation, and that remained in office with the tacit support of at least part of the opposition, was a threat to democracy. Liberals spoke of the Harper regime as if there were parallels between a Canadian minority government and the dictatorships we're seeing in Libya and Syria. And I'm sure they had many chuckles about using that term and figuring it out. But the words Harper regime rang hollow with ordinary voters. Many Canadians have escaped regimes, and many have families still living under them. So they knew the difference. Now, in terms of the last election was about the economy. It was not about contempt, advertising, vote splitting. It was about the economy, and that was the top priority of Canadians. And as much as politicians may think that elections are about them and those in the news media, at the end of the day, elections are about the voters. The voter is the central participant in each national general election. And the issue on voters' mind in the last election was nothing else but the economy. And our position on the top issue facing Canadians was pretty simple. Stephen Harper is a practical, no-nonsense leader who gets things done. With his economic action plan, Canada is emerging from the global recession as one of the world's top-performing economies. And Stephen Harper has a low-tax plan to protect and create jobs and continue Canada's recovery. He's the leader to keep Canada strong, stable, and secure. A leader for all Canadians. Just get some water. Now, on the other hand, Mr. Ignatieff, hardly talked about the economy during the last election campaign. His platform lacked an economic plan. His key 5 policy priorities, the family pack, didn't relate to the economy, certainly not directly. And once again, elections are about voters. And at their peril, politicians ignore the voters' issues. And the results bear out. Only two parties with very different positions in the last campaign focused on the economy. And between them, they won 70% of the vote and 269 of the 308 seats. Now, because elections are about the voters, elections are usually won by the party most in touch with them. And in the last campaign, too much chatter was about topics that didn't affect ordinary Canadians. The procedure for getting into the Prime Minister's rallies, for instance, how many questions he took from the Ottawa Press Gallery. And the Liberal campaign was very quick to seize on these issues, and the media were quick to report on them. But for the record, during the last election campaign, Prime Minister Harper did more than 80 one-on-one interviews during the last campaign and answered nearly 1,000 unique questions for media across the country: local, regional, multicultural, television, radio, print. And the list goes on. Now, if you remember, during the national election debate, there was a discussion between Mr. Layton and Mr. Ignatieff on the latter's attendance record. Now, where Mr. Ignatieff failed in that exchange was not because of Mr. Layton's criticism, but his response. Mr. Ignatieff responded to Mr. Layton and forgot to respond to Canadians. The question was not that complicated, nor was the answer. Mr. Ignatieff could have very easily said that I was on the road traveling across the country, meeting Canadians, and that would have resonated. Instead of explaining, Mr. Ignatieff attacked the legitimacy of the question. You know, and I quote him, "Mr. Layton, I don't surrender to anybody in my respect for the institution of Parliament and my obligation to the people who put me there, so don't give me lessons about respect for democracy. Don't give me lessons." Perhaps that was an appropriate response to Mr. Layton, but this wasn't just about dialogue between two people. It was a dialogue with all Canadians. And the dialogue included an estimated 4 million viewers who were full participants in that election. And what they took away from that exchange was that Mr. Ignatieff felt answering was beneath him. Now, clear messaging, closely related to the economy and the concerns of ordinary Canadians, clear messaging was a third factor in the last election campaign. We had a clear question. It's the economy. Send Prime Minister Harper back to work. The NDP also had a clear message. Even though we felt its policies were wrong-headed about taking practical action to help Canadians, their message and their branding was clear. Now, the other parties that fared most poorly offered the least clear messages. Meanwhile, the Liberals failed to represent a coherent or consistent story of what the election was about. They talked about contempt of Parliament, they talked about spending priorities, then they unveiled 5 new spending promises, then they shifted to healthcare, claiming they were going to do it all along, but they had not previously mentioned it. It wasn't even in their family pack. They also forgot to check voter preference on healthcare. We knew, for example, that the NDP led the Liberals by a 2-to-1 margin. Then the Liberals reverted to contempt of Parliament and contempt for democracy. Then they urged Canadians to rise up against the Harper regime. In that entire list, they never focused on the economy. The lesson of this tale, when you lack a clear message, 5 or 6 competing messages are no substitute, and nor is a pair of red running shoes. Now, all I will say of our strategy is that the economy was and remains our #1 priority. We were focused, and we continue to focus on issues that matter to ordinary Canadians. Now, we wanted Canadians to see that we were delivering results. Canadians decided to entrust Prime Minister Harper with the leadership of a strong, stable, national, majority, Conservative government. And that is another message that consistently throughout the election campaign was repeated because A, it resonated, and there's a key rule in your messaging. When you figure out exactly what the right message is, the moment you get tired of saying it, that is exactly the moment where it's starting to penetrate the market. So relentlessly pushing your message is key to the success of your organization. And they also entrusted Mr. Layton with the leadership of the opposition. And on that note, I had the privilege and pleasure of meeting and quite often chatting with Mr. Layton. He was a very good man, and I know that he's missed by a lot of people who both had met him and not, because clearly during the last campaign, he inspired. Now, next step is I'll leave politics, which is great. It's been a great feeling since September, so this is a very temporary return. Where do Canadians get their news from, and how much do they actually watch, listen, and read? It's actually becoming increasingly difficult to measure accurately and get an answer to that question. Gone are the days where Canadians used to have the ability to watch one national newscast at the end of the day and read one newspaper in the morning. Now, if you see these statistics, 90% of Canadians claim they watch the news, but 52% actually do. 70% claim that they read the news, but 51% actually do. 53% claim that they listen to the news, but only 33% actually do. Now, television is still the most important medium at our disposal, but you will see that online news is quickly catching up. Television is a non-self-selecting medium that informs and persuades the audience, and the combination of audio and video stimulation renders it the most emotive and therefore the most persuasive. And as I said, online media is gaining traction, and I really have no doubt that surpassing television is only a matter of time. Now, in terms of what Canadians also watch the most, top English shows in English Canada, it's CSI, The House, and that's critical for advertising. When you're choosing on behalf of your organization how to advertise, in order for advertising to work, your advertising campaign needs to be meaningful. Spending $50,000 or $100,000 on an advertising campaign simply doesn't cut it. And what's important is also to figure out who are you talking to, and once you've determined that, where you will place your advertising will be critical. Also, national morning news. There is quite a range on viewership, but national morning shows are still quite popular. Now, in terms of radio, most listened to in the morning. That's when people listen to radio the most. And a little bit of statistics, there's actually more than 600 commercial radio stations in Canada. Now, radio is a non-self-selecting device that can be informative and persuasive, but it still lacks that visual stimulation that television provides. Top newspapers in the country, you'll notice that they tend to originate from major metropolitan areas, led by the Toronto Star. And still, whether the top ranked, which is the Toronto Star, or Winnipeg Free Press, number 15, you'll notice that newspapers still have an influence. Now, one thing that is extremely impressive as far as we go as Canadians is that, according to recent stats, the average Canadian spends 43.5 hours a month online. That's 8 hours more than the average American user. And this statistics means that we cannot, as an organization, ignore online and new media medium. It is the up-and-comer in the evolving media landscape, without a doubt. Also, in terms of top websites in Canada, whether it's Google, Facebook, YouTube, Yahoo, Canadians are going to various sources of online devices to get their information. Now, I could not leave here without talking to you a little bit about what I currently do at the Canadian Olympic Committee since I started last October. As Christina said, the hair is growing back naturally, and the smile is more and more authentic, and that's because working with athletes is absolutely inspiring. For example, last night, the Canadian Olympic Committee, for the first time in its history, hosted a reception with multicultural media, where about 50 multicultural media from the Greater Toronto area came. They met about 10 of our athletes, and our message was clear. We know you matter. We know you speak to millions of Canadians every day and every week, and we'd like to develop a relationship. Now, our plan serves as a roadmap to Canadian Olympic Committee to build the Canadian Olympic team brand, energy, and momentum in the post-2010 Vancouver world. Now, the successful execution of our plan is going to position the Canadian Olympic Committee as an attractive brand for all Canadians. And our potential is truly unlimited, but our resources are not. So we're being very smart, strategic, disciplined, and we leverage all brand assets as a team approach. Now, our goal is 4 years from now that the Canadian Olympic team logo is so strong that when a kid walks into a retail store, he is staring at a Leafs hat and a Canadian Olympic team hat, he will buy the Canadian Olympic team hat. Now, whether it's expanding media coverage by expanding our network and our relationships with media, thinking beyond sports media, we've started working, for example, quite a few of our athletes have appeared on the Rick Mercer report recently. Our chef de mission for the London Games, Mark Tewksbury, was recently with George Strombolopoulos. But also expanding media, our media contacts by expanding our network, whether it's specialized media, fashion, lifestyle, like I said, multicultural media, regional media, local media, more public exposures, whether it's at the Toronto International Film Festival, fashion magazines, talk shows, the Food Network. The opportunities are endless. And at the end of the day, proactive engagement is what matters. Now, sport is a universal language. It is a lifelong passion for consumers, particularly the young, and sport drives human inspiration. It also drives human aspiration and empowerment in good times and in bad times. Sports are our heritage and define our culture as innovative, energetic, competitive, and passionate. And it's a great business to be in because it's truly a lot of fun. Now, it's a universal language, and to establish a stronger brand, one that will get Canadians to rally behind our athletes 365 days a year, not just during the 2-week period of the Olympic Games every 2 years. It's a brand that will have Canadians recognizing, relating to, and supporting our athletes, their Olympic efforts throughout trial season, building up to the Games. A brand that will serve to attract sponsorship dollars as well. You know, very few people know, but the Canadian Olympic Committee is 98% funded by the private sector. And we want to help our athletes get closer to reaching their Olympic dreams and owning the podium. One of our goals has been to create the most inspiring campaign ever. I won't say much on that, but in the next few weeks, closer to April, there's going to be a brand new brand campaign that will be launched that we are currently working on. And quite frankly, our strategy is simple. Tell the story of the journey every day on every platform you can tell it on. And our insight is our athletes are heroes in the truest sense. They are relentless, strong, and fiercely disciplined. They represent power, honor, and victory, stopping at nothing as we reach further Olympic dreams. Now, our plan serves as a roadmap to build the Canadian Olympic team brand, energy, and momentum in that post-Vancouver world, and making our athletes household names. That is one of the big challenges, and one of those challenges is throughout the Games, before and beyond, to leverage every single opportunity so that most of our Olympic athletes do become household names. Now, in terms of you know, the fan base, you know, we have the torchbearer is what we call it, which is a 360-degree fan which is connected to the Canadian Olympic team because we represent, for example, his childhood dreams, his passion for sports, the Games. So one thing that we focus on very much is making sure, especially on our digital media strategy, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook. When I started at the Canadian Olympic Committee, we had approximately 4,000 followers on Twitter. Through engaging, interacting, and answering questions, we're now approaching 10,000 followers on Twitter. And that's something that's very important to our fan base. Finally, I do want to thank you for inviting me here today. And I will conclude with one of the latest videos that we have produced at the Canadian Olympic Committee, one that we worked on recently. And it speaks to back to the beginning. What is a brand? So as the Canadian Olympic Committee's Executive Communications Director and upcoming press chief for the London Games, this is the brand that inspires me every single morning when I get up before the sun gets up. And it's what inspires me every single night before I go to bed, slightly prior to the sun coming up. And I hope that it inspires you too, and you'll join us on this journey. Thank you very much.
So thanks so much, Dimitri. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like pulling out my Canadian flag and waving it. No, that was truly great insight on the components, on breaking down the components of what makes a good brand. And I feel like we've gotten a great insider's perspective between your presentation and Brad Levine's this morning on the last election campaign. And similar theme through both of those presentations is the importance of brand discipline and how it led to two very successful campaigns in the last election. And I think that's skills and insight that everyone in this room can certainly take with them. Luckily, we do have time for some questions for Dimitri. And I'd ask you, does anybody have any questions? If you want to either come to the mic or if you can speak in a very loud voice. Yes.
So I find what you're saying about consistency and looking for a brand for a long term. My question for you is, how do you go about selling that to, for instance, a board of directors who changes every couple of years and wants to add their own piece to something? How do you continue to keep people on that same train? Because after time, they get frustrated, do something new, do something innovative, to market with their own piece, and so that can throw your branding exercise right off.
You're absolutely right on those challenges. And I think that differentiating between tactics, strategies is very different. I'll go back to Volvo. As long as the foundation, first of all, what people think of you and how you define yourself is not an exercise that happens overnight either. It must be backed by research, knowing the market that you are focusing on, but above all, making the right decisions. And that's part of the big challenge, is making the right or the wrong decisions. And I think that for any board of directors that on a regular basis needs to be convinced of the direction of the company, results often speak for themselves, right? So everything that happens and what I talked about with the strategic planning component, the execution of a strategy through the tactics that you've identified will tell if your strategy is the right one. And when a board of directors sees results, they usually tend to question less. There's always the need to innovate, to change, to modernize, to adapt. But that cannot come at the price of constantly changing what your core purpose is. Because if you change the foundations on a regular basis, very soon not only will your audience not know what you stand for, as an organization, you will not know what you stand for.
Yes.
I was wondering, you said earlier that bad mismanagement can go to harm the brand.
Yes.
And I was wondering how do you feel that you succeeded at protecting the brand during many challenges that you probably did face during the Olympics?
Not too many. Oh, the Olympics. Oh, great. Okay, this is great.
Yeah.
Olympic question.
So we know that there were challenges, and how do you feel you succeeded at protecting the brand?
Well, again, at the core of our business are athletes. That is the focal point. And their performance, their story. I'll give you an example. Mary Spencer, for the first time in the London Games, women's boxing will be a part of the Olympic Games. And she's got a great story. I met her late last year after I started the Canadian Olympic Committee. And that's one of the things that I've focused on doing, is meeting athletes and meeting our national sports federations. That is the core of our business. And telling their stories overpowers. And again, I said it's every, whether your brand is perceived as positive or negative. It's the whole, every experience that your consumer has with it, positive, negative, neutral. And I would say that as far as Olympic athletes goes, the net sum is clearly positive in terms of what experiences people have with them. To go back to Mary Spencer, what a great story. You know, she goes jogging on Christmas Day. She trains with male athletes who are better than her. She's currently the world champion. And there are so many inspiring stories of so many athletes, the sacrifices, and these are the stories that we will be telling at the Canadian Olympic Committee, more aggressively, relentlessly pushing our message and making sure that they become the household name. So when you know where the core of your business is, it must be a positive, or else it should not be the core of your business to begin with. In the case of the Canadian Olympic Committee, you know, there are always distractions in our organizations. But as long as you focus and you have the right core, your organization will be successful.
I have a question. In regards to brand equity around the Canadian Olympics, a lot of our support from our levels here is through purchase of apparel, which is used in, is essentially the face of the Olympics for us here in Canada. What do you feel is the purchase of Hudson's Bay from an American company in 2008? What do you feel that as Canadians selling this merchandise exclusively in essentially an American chain does for the brand incentive?
Well, at the end of the day, and first of all, let me explain the concept of these sponsorships, whether it's clothing. The Canadian Olympic Committee, as I said earlier, relies 98% of the funding that we get, which goes to athletes, comes from the private sector. So it works in quadrennial periods. So right now we're in the period of renewing our partnership agreements between 2013 and 2016. So Hudson's Bay Company, for example, is a national partner of the Canadian Olympic Committee. At the end of the day, if you're able to make your brand go worldwide, as long as you're able to sustain the demand and sustain your brand equity by leveraging these opportunities, then it's a net positive. But you know, primarily Canadian HBC gear primarily are targeted towards the Canadian consumer.
Any more questions?
If you could tell us what the biggest difference you found is between working with PMO and now working with the Canadian Olympic Committee.
There's a lot. I don't call reporters at 1 o'clock in the morning to complain about their stories. And I have to tell you, I adore sports media. There's a lot of differences. I mean, when you're working in the Prime Minister's office as his Director of Communications, you basically need to be aware of absolutely everything that happened, is happening, and will happen. Your day starts at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and it genuinely ends around 12, 1 o'clock in the morning if you want to be an effective communications director. The stress is a lot different. There is a clear difference in that. You know, and as I said it, yeah, I mean, the relationship with stakeholders, the relationship with media, and the type of work you do. I mean, it's a very inspiring thing to be able to work for the Prime Minister of Canada. And what I'd say after 10 years, which is how long I was there for, 9 to be more accurate, politics is not a career. Politics is something that you do as a vocation, as a calling. You don't do it forever. So where I am today, my days still start at 6 o'clock in the morning, but in a very different way. You know, we're working on the London communications plan. We're working on London planning, launching a new brand campaign. It's a different type of work. Still a lot of work because it's a much smaller organization. And I'd say that, you know, my end of day is probably a lot less stressful than my colleagues in the PMO these days.
Well, if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank Dimitri very much. Oh, there are questions. Good, excellent, because we do have more time.
So we've had 2 presentations now on successful campaigns politically.
Yes.
Heard from Brad earlier, and just heard from you. And I want to find out, do you have to be a believer in the product you are pitching for a political party, or are you able to pitch it as a brand whether or not you believe that? And then the other thing I wanted to find out from you, because we haven't heard from the campaigns that weren't successful, so I want to find out from you, if you're not a believer, or if you're not connected to the brand per se, what advice would you have given to the other party in terms of how to be successful as you've been?
The first question is extremely important, actually. It's an excellent question. Regardless what you do, if you're not a believer, get out of the business. If you're just looking for that paycheck and a 9-to-5 job, you will function in any organization in doing the bare minimum. And whether it's in politics or a startup or a multinational, if you want to play a key role in branding, in communications, in marketing, in public relations, in expanding your digital strategy, in anything, if you're not a believer, you're clearly in the wrong business. It's not something that you do just for the heck of it. So that would be my very honest advice on the first. On the second, I really don't know. I think it goes back to the essentials of figuring out what your core purpose is, what your vision is, what your mission, what your values, and what you have to offer, especially as a political party. Luckily, I didn't have to give them any advice. So I would, again, it's keeping things simple. What you say must resonate. It must resonate with the central, the core of the business in elections and in politics is the voter. And unless you're talking to voters, they are not listening. And if they are not listening, they're not considering you as an option.
Excellent. So you in the back, if you can give your name too.
I was curious, how do you feel that social media is playing a role in a conservative branding?
That's an excellent question. In general terms, I believe that social media is a reality of our society. It cannot be ignored. And that should be a conscious decision of any organization. Just like typewriters are no longer the main way to write up a letter, you must be online. You must have a digital strategy in any organization. So, whether it's the Conservative Party, one of the websites actually, number 15 most visited websites are Government of Canada websites, because people go there to get information, whether it's tax returns, whether it's the weather. The weather.gc.ca is the most popular website that the Government of Canada owns. So it's about interacting, it's about engaging, it's about being responsive. The Prime Minister was the first Canadian Prime Minister and the second world leader to do an online interview with YouTube, which occurred following an interview that President Obama did. So you must reach, online is the second most watched, read, heard medium where Canadians get their information from. So those who choose to ignore it are missing on communicating with a significant part of the demographic. If you look on Twitter, Prime Minister Harper's has, last I checked, he must be well over 150,000 followers right now. Apart from Justin Bieber and a few others, he's faring pretty well. So it's a key component of any strategy. 8 years ago, it wasn't. I remember the 2004 election campaign with Jim Armour, who hired me in 2002. Jim, by the way, is the former Director of Communications to the Prime Minister as well. So 2004 election campaign, our BlackBerry screens were black and white. There was no Twitter. There was no Facebook. By 2011, the entire press gallery for 37 days was glued to Twitter during the entire election campaign. And that's very important, by the way. It's part of the strategy. It is not the strategy. You cannot lose sight of all the other platforms, all the other mediums by which Canadians get their information from, but also provide feedback on.
Thanks, Dimitri. And I think your former boss had a question for you.
Yes. Was he on the list?
Very good presentation. I'm struck by the similarities between what you were talking about, what Brad was talking about this morning, just the importance of branding and positioning in modern political campaigns and modern political parties. Just more question for Brad, since he's not here.
I speak for Brad too, so.
The Conservative Party, the NDP, put an awful lot of effort into branding the party or branding the leader as the party. So do you think it's possible these days for political branding to extend beyond a leader? Or do you think, obviously in terms of the NDP, you're going to now have to start again and brand themselves, or is there some brand equity that builds up over time, or what are royalties shifting? Do you think it's completely evolving?
No, I don't. I think it's a combination of both, Jim. And the first part is you get 20, 30 reporters on a plane and a bus to cover a national campaign and to cover a leader who wants to be Prime Minister of the country. So obviously, the national campaign's responsibility, and a large part of the focus is always leader-driven. Those are the people that, get hammered with questions every single day, at least 4. But there are other components, like, for example, whether it's during election campaign or while in government, but primarily during election campaign, you have ministers crisscrossing across the country, and everybody's told the story of Jason Kenney, being known as the Minister of Curry in a Hurry, kind of going across the country throughout an election campaign. Ministers McKay. So there are several layers. I think it is leader-driven, has always been leader-driven. Remember Trudeau-mania. I think that in large part people vote for what the organization has to offer. And once again, the CEO and the chief brand officer of the organization is the party leader. And within that organization, you have the ambassadors, you have the team that fans out across the country, your 308 candidates that promote that same brand and that communicate that same brand. So it's a combination of both, but the reality is the CEO is the one that gets the spotlight, either the party leader. And I think it's, I'm doing some research these days on how political communications have evolved over the last 20, 30 years. And once again, the foundation is the same. Things aren't done that differently. It's how many platforms are available to us today compared to when Prime Minister Diefenbaker was in office and he was whistle stopping on a train, and media at the time, in order to file their stories, needed to run and send a telegram, and if they missed something that they could have filed, the story was over. Where back then communication strategies, you could have a cabinet meeting that lasted 3 days on a story that broke on a Monday, and you'd have until the Thursday to respond to it. Whereas today, if you haven't responded in 2 minutes, it spirals out of control, and then it takes days to bring it back, if you can bring it back. So reaction time has changed, the time to think has changed. Also, the role of political staff has somewhat evolved in terms of their responsibilities and how quickly they must act in order to either keep something on track or just allow it to go off track. And very often, talking to reporters and quite frankly to people who have served on the government side back when Prime Minister Trudeau was in office or Prime Minister Pearson was in office, there was time back then to make sure that every word in an article was carefully sourced. But now what you have is you have reporters rushing to confirm a story, and then you have somebody behind them saying, oh, it's already on the Toronto Star website, put it on the Globe, and then everybody just piles in without necessarily having done that due diligence that once upon a time was essential, where sources were only meant to protect somebody, not to give cover to somebody in order to attack somebody else. So things have changed a lot, and technology has had a leading role in that. And technology, by meaning in terms of the number of platforms we have available to us to communicate, which creates competition. So that's a reality.
And Scott, you had a question?
I'm a former news executive, so I also got tired of complaining to reporters about their stories. Wondered about the relationship, the Olympic Committee's relationship with, you know, a behemoth like Bell Media and CTV, because all the branding of the Olympic movement I've seen so far has been CTV and not the Olympic. It doesn't appear to be the Olympic Committee. Are you pulling the strings behind? Are you working in partnership? How does that relationship work with
Well,
CTV in particular?
that's the consortium. I assume you're referring to the consortium, which is a group of media organizations, which includes CTV, which includes... Exactly. Now that, they have, what happens for every games, and that happens through the International Olympic Committee. So at every games what happens is there are broadcast rights of which broadcaster can televise live and video of competitions. And in this case, there's a consortium right now, CTV, same consortium as for the 2010 Olympic Games. So they have the rights for the 2-week period, the 2-week period during the games. So these are independent campaigns that they have, and they obviously promote athletes, which for us, it's great. They ultimately promote our athletes. At the end of the day, that's what we do as well. But it is independent of the Canadian Olympics. So the Believe campaign is a CTV production, consortium production.
But do you know, how does that relationship work? I mean, the Olympic Committee...
There are certain branding rules, like the use of the Olympic rings, which they buy the rights to, but all production is entirely up to them.
I've been on both ends of the broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious about how you are branding, and you have such a strong brand, and yet a lot of the branding that I've seen so far belongs to, you know, these CTV is pushing it so heavily that that in fact becomes a CTV Olympic brand.
It does in large part, and that's what we do through partnerships. Through partnerships is promoting the brand, promoting athletes, and you know, whether it's the Belief campaign or the broadcast of the games, what does it do? It promotes the brand, and the brand is not the Canadian Olympic Committee. The brand is the Canadian Olympic team, and once again with athletes being at the center of it. So through these types of partnerships, the promotion of our athletes, and don't forget that obviously the consortium has millions of dollars at its disposal for their PR campaigns and their advertising campaigns. So it's independent work in a nutshell. They've bought rights, and there are parameters around purchasing and buying those rights during a games period and for Olympic Games, and they use them accordingly.
Well, if there are no further questions, first of all, I'll thank you for adding to those that list of questions. Oh, there is someone? Oh, absolutely. Go, Susan. Yes.
And it's a non-journalistic question, but it's not for a newspaper. I'm just intrigued if you see how much political advertising and communications have become similar to the corporate world and commercial world. You know that. Do you think that soon we're going to see the same rules that the private sector has over advertising and communications in the political world? I'm thinking of a poll I saw a couple of months ago saying that people don't believe political advertising anymore, whereas they do trust commercial ones. Do you think that maybe the time is coming where all the same rules over the private sector are going to have to be brought to the public sector too?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question, although political advertising does get approval through Telecaster. So you cannot just create an ad and just put it on television. Correct. I don't know. To say that, you know, whether it's political advertising as a whole and commercial advertising as a whole, that political isn't does not penetrate a market and corporate does, it's too broad of a statement, I would say. It depends on the ad. It depends on the ad, and you know, when people watch political ads, they know that it's a political ad which is intended to promote one party and do the opposite to the other one. As long as ads are truthful and represent facts, they're usually effective. That would be my argument. And, you know, from past experience, 2004 election campaign, some of the Liberal ads, I would argue, were not that truthful. Some would say they were effective, though. Yes.
Do you think, and do you have any information on this? I've never been able to get a straight answer. Do you think people are getting more information these days from advertising or from the news media?
That's a big challenge. That is the million-dollar question today. Where do Canadians get their information from? It is becoming increasingly difficult to answer that question accurately. And anybody who has an accurate answer, I would argue, is slightly making it up.
I asked some pollsters, and they insist the news media, but I don't, it's not our experience that that's.
It has become and will become an increasingly difficult question to answer, because measuring, you know, maybe some people get it on Twitter. It's becoming such a difficult question to answer because there are no ways to measure it accurately, including polling. Polling used to be done by simply calling somebody at home. Some people don't have telephone home numbers anymore. They only have a cell phone. So I don't know, and I won't pretend to. Always used to.
Thanks. And while we're on the subject of honest answers, I have one parting question for you. Do you
Yes.
miss being on Parliament Hill this week?
I'll be honest with you, since I left, I started on September the 5th, 2002, after the gentleman in the back playing on his BlackBerry decided to hire me, Jim Armour. And I left on September the 5th, 2011, 9 years to the day. September the 5th was a statutory holiday, Labor Day weekend. I worked until 11 o'clock at night, sent in my last memo to the Prime Minister before turning off my computer and closing the light switch. And this week, last month, next month, I don't crave returning into that office. So it was one of the best experiences of my life. Did it for 9 years. And like I said earlier, politics is not a career. So no, no. I don't envy seeing that light open at 11 o'clock at night the way it used to be with me.
So thank you so much, Dimitri, for sharing your experience and your thoughts. And I think in some of the questions where we've tackled some of the issues we'll be dealing with in the final panel that's going to be back in this room at 3:15 after the break, which is social media and how it's transforming our day-to-day content and what's the role of social media versus traditional media. So thank you for getting us started along that path. And without further ado, I'd like to give you a parting gift on behalf of the organizers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.